tales for dark nights.
The following performance is a third-round entry in the 2016 Evil Idol voice acting competition, and you, the listener, get to help decide who wins. If you'd like to hear more of this contestant, voting for them is simple and only takes a moment. Just click the thumbs up icon. Can't stand them? Then click the thumbs down icon instead, and cast them into the digital netherrealm from whence they came. You decide their fate. Good luck to all of our contestants.
Blackroft. Written and read by Christopher Keegan. For Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and the Evil Idol competition. My name is Dr. Thomas Dugan, and what you are about to read is my story. It is not a fairy tale to lull children off to sleep, or some yarn told by a travelling performer to distract and entertain with a moral at its end. This story is much darker, for it is a true story, and must be told. I shall begin with my darling and long-suffering wife Elizabeth. She entertained my love of the medical profession so much that she followed me all over the north of England, as I darted from one medical practice to another, constantly uprooting our happy little home in search of another project. Being of a restless nature, I never found anywhere that sufficiently challenged me. Elizabeth insisted that a child would provide the relevant distraction. We prepared thoroughly for our new roles as mother and father. However, what we were not prepared for was the death of our child before he even left the womb. Elizabeth is the strongest person I have ever known, and rather than succumbing to the Great Depression which hung over our heads, she encouraged a change, and urged me to go south to London to seek our fortune and build a new, happy home with a fresh start. That is how I found myself in a gentleman's club at 11 p.m. on a smoggy London September evening, and sat across from me was Sir Robert Teeling. We'd roomed together at university, and whereas I roamed around with barely a penny to my name, Bertie had secured a hefty salary and a knighthood doing something or other for the government. "My dear Doogie, why don't you consider the private sector?" he exclaimed in his boorish manner. "Bertie, there is nothing I would like more, but I've spent the last few years lancing boils and treating cuts and bruises in Yorkshire. I hardly feel my skills are practised enough for the private sector." "Tell me, what do you know of medicine of the mind?" "You mean asylums? The treatment of the insane and irrational?" "Very little, Bertie. Only what I've read in journals. Why, are there opportunities in that field?" There may be. A small government-run facility in Kent that I just happen to know needs a skilled doctor. The pay is extraordinarily good for a job of this nature. If you like, I could have a word." "Bertie," I said, delighted by this turn of events, "it sounds perfect. What's the name of the asylum?" Blackroft Hall." It's amazing to think how excited I was when I first heard that name. I felt that this was my fortunes turning around. I was so motivated to get started I went home and packed that very night, and 2 days later I set out for Blackroft. The heat and smell of Waterloo Station caught in the back of my throat, and the coal smoke swirled and turned the figures in front of me into wispy ghosts passing hither and thither. I quickly found myself a train and located an empty carriage. Happy to be out of the choking station, I slumped in the warm seat and made myself comfortable. Before too long the train pulled out of the station, and not long after that, my chin slumped onto my chest and my eyes closed. I found myself walking through a forest. The dead leaves crunched satisfyingly under my feet, and the branches above my head swayed in a pine-scented breeze. The sound of birds was so pleasing to me I stopped walking just to listen. This forest felt so alive, and yet there was something not quite right. A feeling in the air, like a storm was coming, like I wasn't quite alone. Suddenly I felt eyes on my back. I started to turn and, "Tickets, please!" I woke with such a start I almost fell from my seat. "Tickets, please, sir." I handed my ticket to the conductor, still breathing rather heavily, and my heart racing. "Arriving at Blackroft in 15 minutes, he said after checking the destination, and left me alone once more. Blackroft station was deserted, and I was the only person to leave the train. However, it was very clear where the hall was, for a large, ominous building towered over the trees and across the fields ahead of me. A small facility, Bertie? I thought to myself. It looks as if it has 5 stories. As I got closer, my wonderment grew. Blackroft Hall looked less like an asylum and more like a manor house or stately home. The turrets of this grand building reached skyward, and the large windows reflected what sun there was into my eyes. But the day grew cold, as I saw that every window had been painted black, and a chill ran up my spine. I finally arrived at the large oak door and reached for the brass knocker. As my fingers touched it, I was filled with panic, a sense to run, to flee, leave, and never come back. But my hand was lifting the knocker and letting it fall with a crash that shook the glass in those horrible black windows. As the sound echoed away, I felt as if the whole world was holding its breath. Then the door opened. "Dr. Dugan?" Yes," I stammered. "My name is Cardell. Please come in." I didn't want to. The last thing I wanted to do was to step foot in this strange and cold place, but I did. I stepped through the door and watched it close behind me with a slam, blocking out the sunlight and plunging me into gloom. After a scratch and a sputter, a match jumped into light, causing shadows to dance crazily around me. Cardell lit a candle, and the flame steadied. "This is not quite what I expected," I said after a pause. "Why, what were you expecting?" "I don't know, a hospital, maybe? Somewhere where the windows aren't painted black?" "Our patients like the dark. You will too, eventually." "Hardly," I said. This man was unnerving me greatly. "Do you wish to get started immediately, Doctor? We can give you some one-on-one time with the patients." He smiled and showed a selection of broken yellow teeth, which made his white tunic seem whiter still. One-on-one time. I know nothing about this facility or its patients or your method of treating them, and I'm expected to start? Start what, for goodness sake? "Doctor, you're here to figure out how to treat them. Follow me." Cardell led me up a large staircase and through a series of winding corridors. It seemed that Blackroft had indeed been a stately home, but long since gone to ruin. The moth-eaten carpet beneath my feet let out puffs of dust at every step, and the mouldering paintings on the walls followed me with their eyes as I passed. Down another winding corridor and into a large room lit by gas lamps. Around the room was a shocking display of damaged humanity. The pale and emaciated bodies in this room were muttering to themselves, or rocking back and forth, or lying naked on the floor, twitching. The smell that reached my nostrils brought bile to my throat. I had to bring a handkerchief to my nose. "Walk where you like," said Cardell, "but keep your voice low. Don't touch them, and don't talk to them." "Should they not be in chains, man?" I said, barely disguising the panic in my voice. "No need. Just don't trigger them, Doctor. Stay calm, and they will too." I began to walk between the human detritus around this room, and saw other members of staff wearing the same white uniform as Cardell, standing around the sides of the room, all casually chatting or reading. They paid no attention to me or their so-called patients. I stepped around cautiously, trying to get a sense of what was going on here. My mind raced, and I began to feel dizzy. The heat, the smell. I made my way to a far corner of the room and leant against the wall, far away from anyone, and tried to calm my breathing and clear my head. When, for the second time that day, I felt a gaze on my back. I turned and was met eye to eye with one of the emaciated figures standing a foot from me. His gaze burnt into me, and I backed further into my corner. "Hello?" I said foolishly. Suddenly a light seemed to ignite in those horrible eyes. "Do you know where you are?" it said in a rasping scrape of a voice. "No," was all I could force from my lips. "The abode of the damned, the home of the cursed, limbo for the possessed. And now we claim you, Doogie." My heart leapt, and I opened my mouth to try and form a word. There was a crunch and a splat as the creature spat in my face. I tasted metal on my lips and in my mouth. I reached up to wipe the sputum from my face, and a smear of red came away on my finger. I saw it grinning back at me, the tip of its tongue hanging from a bit of sinew between the red blood-stained teeth spread wide in a grin, the eyes electric and manic. The creature's blood dripped down the corner of my mouth. My stomach heaved. I staggered and vomited. Between the gurgling heaves and gasping screams coming from my mouth, I heard more manic laughter. The man who had bitten off the tip of his own tongue and spat his blood into my mouth was laughing. His own blood was running like a flood from his mutilated mouth, his head thrown back in ecstatic mirth, and his laughter rang through me like a bolt of lightning. The orderlies were on him, wrestling him to the ground, and I ran, jumping over the clawing fingers of the bodies around me, down a dark corridor and another, down the stairs and through the oak front door, and into the murky gloom of dusk. My heart didn't slow its hammering against the inside of my chest until I reached the train station, and even then the rising panic followed me onto the train back to London. As I sat in the train carriage, I tried to make sense of what had happened to me. Who was that creature? And what on earth was Blackroft Hall? I only knew one man who might have answers. I burst into the office of Bertie Teeling, most likely looking like a madman myself. My waistcoat and overcoat were stained with vomit, my shoes and trousers covered with dust and mud, and my face was drawn and pale. "Doogie, what on earth—" "Bertie, where the hell did you send me?" You have no idea the horrors I experienced at your God-forsaken hall. For goodness sake, man, you're raving. Please, take a seat. Tell me what happened. I sat down, and Bertie thrust a sweet sherry into my shaking hand. I began to detail my shocking exploits, and his face grew graver and graver the more I spoke. Finally, when I'd finished my tale, he stood up and walked slowly to the window of his office. "Doogie, I'm so very sorry. I thought the stories about Blackroft were merely fear and fantasy." "What is that place, Bertie?" "It is an asylum. However, it is an asylum for those with the unfortunate luck to be possessed by demons or devils. Something that before today I believed to be untrue." "Possessed?" "Robert, I am no 5-year-old child. Those people were damaged, maybe beyond repair, but possessed? I should go home, and in the morning I shall catch the train north to see Elizabeth. You have damaged our friendship, Robert." With that I stormed from his office, trying to ignore his shouts that followed me. By this time it was very late, and the London streets were close to deserted. My tired feet dragged on the flagstones, but it wasn't long before I reached my rooms. Flopping down onto my bed, it crossed my mind to write a letter to Elizabeth before I leave for Yorkshire in the morning. But before I could think twice about it, my eyes were closed, and my head was soft against the pillow. I was walking again through the forest. The fallen blanket of leaves crunched under my feet, however this time there was no bird song, and the dark boughs of the trees above me seemed to choke the air from around them, and made me panic for breath. The feeling of eyes on my back once more made the hair on my neck prickle uncomfortably. I began to walk faster and faster, and then run, and then I snapped and launched into a full-blown sprint of panic. My heart beat so loud I felt it would tear my chest in two. My lungs burnt with every breath, and my brain was screaming inside my skull. Finally I whirled around. Nothing. Nothing except the oppressive gloom that filled the forest. I turned back, and my nerves shattered. Standing less than an inch from my face was the broken creature with the bloody grin, and the tip of its mutilated tongue hanging between its teeth. Every breath it took showered me in drops of blood and saliva, and when it spoke a cascade of blood and bile fell from its lips. "Dr. Dugan, we mocked you, now we claim you." I opened my mouth to scream, but the beast slammed its hands to the side of my face and came in to embrace me. It clamped its jaws around my own tongue and bit down hard. I fell to my knees on the forest floor, choking on the warm blood that flowed from my mouth and down the back of my throat. "Your life is ours, but we only want one thing, and we will let you go." I looked at this being, and my eyes seemed to be all the questions it needed. Leaning in close, it whispered, "We want your wife." So there we are. That is my story. If you are reading this and you are not Elizabeth, then please share this writing and try to get it to my darling wife. Elizabeth, if you do read this, know that I have loved you dearly. But you should never come to Blackroft Hall, even if you intend to visit your poor, raving husband, because something else waits for you there. Besides, I couldn't talk to you anyway. I have no tongue.
Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, don't forget to cast your vote for this contestant via either a thumbs up or thumbs down vote. By doing so, you'll help us determine who will become the next permanent member of our voice acting team. At the close of voting on September 23rd, based on your votes, the top 5 contestants will progress to the 4th and final round to take place live on October 31st at our annual Halloween live stream event, based entirely on your votes. Thank you for voting and for helping to spread the word. You're listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm Steve Taylor, host of Chilling Tales, the podcast, encouraging you to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.